So let's talk about something that completely changed the world. We're going to explore how a single piece of technology, the printing press, didn't just change how we read, it literally reshaped entire societies, it sparked revolutions, and it completely redrew the map of the world. I mean, just stop and think about that for a second. Imagine a world where this screen was just blank. A world where knowledge wasn't right at your fingertips, but was some rare, incredibly precious, and for most people, totally inaccessible thing. Well, that was the reality for just about everyone before the age of print. You see, before print, everything was locked away in manuscripts. Now, these were beautiful, handwritten documents, for sure, but they were ridiculously slow to create, super expensive, and honestly, pretty fragile. They were strictly for the elite. Then, boom, print comes along and changes the whole game. All of a sudden, books become cheaper, way more durable, and available to a massive new audience. But this revolution wasn't the work of one person or one single moment. Not at all. It was actually an idea that journeyed across continents and evolved over centuries, starting long, long before it ever reached Europe. The story really begins in the East. As early as the 6th century, China was already using woodblocks to mass-produce textbooks for their really demanding civil service exams. In fact, the oldest printed book we know of, the Diamond Sutra, dates all the way back to 868 AD in Japan. But it took centuries for this technology to make its way west, finally arriving in Europe when Marco Polo came back from his travels in 1295. So by the late Middle Ages, Europe was just hungry for books. But the old way of doing things, manuscripts, just couldn't keep up. They were painfully slow to copy, they cost a fortune to produce, and all the different styles of handwriting made them really hard to read sometimes. This stage was absolutely set for a major technological breakthrough. And that is where Johannes Gutenberg walks onto the scene. Now, he didn't invent the idea of printing, but what he did was perfect a system that would set Europe, and really the whole world, completely ablaze with new ideas. Gutenberg was a pretty clever innovator from Strasbourg, Germany. He basically took what he knew from his family's work with wine and olive presses, combined it with his incredible skills as a master goldsmith, and created the mechanical, movable type press. By making these individual metal letters that could be arranged and rearranged, he made printing unbelievably faster. The impact was, well, it was staggering. Just think about this. In the mid-1400s, there were maybe 20 million books in all of Europe. 100 years later, that number exploded to 200 million. This wasn't just an improvement. It was a total revolution in how information was shared. So what was the very first book he printed with this new machine? The Bible, of course. He made about 180 copies, which was an incredible number for the time. And it's a perfect illustration of this transition period. The text was printed mechanically, but the fancy borders, those were often still hand-painted by artists for his wealthy clients. A real blend of the old world and the new. Okay, so this explosion of information created a brand new problem, especially for people in power. The big question became, how in the world do you control ideas when they can suddenly spread faster than fire? And maybe no one understood the power of the press better than the religious reformer Martin Luther. In 1517, he wrote his famous 95 Theses, criticizing the Catholic Church. Thanks to the printing press, his ideas basically went viral. They reached tens of thousands of people and kicked off the Protestant Reformation, a movement that literally split the church in two. Of course, the establishment fought back. The Catholic Church felt threatened by all these new ideas, so it established the Inquisition to hunt down anyone it considered a heretic. And in 1558, it created the Index of Prohibited Books, pretty much the world's first major censorship list, in a desperate attempt to get control of the narrative again. And this battle over ideas wasn't just religious. It got political fast. This quote from the French novelist Louise Sébastien Mercier just captures the mood perfectly. Enlightenment thinkers used print to question the absolute power of kings and queens, spreading these radical ideas about rights, reason, and liberty that ended up laying the groundwork for the French Revolution. But, the print revolution wasn't just about big ideas from famous thinkers. Its most profound impact, maybe, was creating entirely new audiences and giving a voice to people who had never, ever had one before. As books got cheaper, society itself started to change. We actually shifted from what historians call a hearing public, where texts were read aloud to a group, to a reading public, where individuals could read silently to themselves. And to help with this transition, printers started publishing things like illustrated ballads and folk tales, making literature accessible even to brand new readers. Now for women, the impact was really complex, kind of a double-edged sword. On one hand, in more liberal families, girls were educated at home and sent to new schools for women. But this progress sparked a lot of fear. Some conservative Hindus believed that a literate girl was destined to become a widow, while some conservative Muslims worried that reading Urdu romances would corrupt women. And yet, women defied these restrictions. I have to tell you the story of Rash Sundari Devi. She was a young married woman in Bengal who was forbidden from learning, so she taught herself to read and write in secret in her kitchen. She later wrote Amar Jiban, which was the first full-length autobiography ever published by an Indian woman. It's just this powerful testament to the unstoppable desire for knowledge. And the journey of print didn't just stop in Europe. When the press finally arrived in India, it became a powerful new weapon, both in debates over social reform and in the growing fight for independence. So the printing press first showed up in India with Portuguese missionaries back in the 16th century. By the late 1700s, you start seeing newspapers like the Bengal Gazette pop up, and print becomes this huge battleground for ideas. Reformers were using it to challenge traditional practices, which you can imagine set the stage for a major clash with the colonial authorities. And this man right here is a perfect example of that clash. This is Bal Gangadhar Tilak, a key figure in India's independence movement. His nationalist newspaper, Kesari, became this incredibly powerful voice against British colonial rule. His articles were so influential, in fact, that the British threw him in prison in 1908, which only sparked widespread protests all across India. He really embodies the power of the press as a tool of resistance. In response to this growing nationalism, the British passed the Vernacular Press Act in 1878. This law gave them sweeping powers to censor any newspaper published in a local Indian language. It was a systematic way to silence dissent. First, track the papers. Second, judge an article as seditious. Third, give a warning. And fourth, if they're ignored, just seize the press and confiscate all the machinery. It was that age-old battle, information versus control, playing out on Indian soil. So in the end, when you step back, the legacy of the printing press is almost impossible to overstate. It fueled religious reformations, it sparked political revolutions, it gave a voice to the marginalized, and it helped create the very idea of a modern nation by connecting people through a shared printed language and shared ideas. And that brings us right to today. The power that Gutenberg unleashed, the power to publish, once belonged to a select few. Now, it's in nearly everyone's pocket. In an age where anyone can publish anything to the entire world in an instant, the fundamental question that started with the printing press is more urgent than ever. Who gets to decide what's true?